All right, so why don't we get started? We will do a brief round of introductions of advisors, and then again, if anyone wants to chime in there, welcome to. My name is Renee Scott, and I'm a co-founder of Green and Open Somerville. And a green space that means a lot to me is the Prospect Hill Monument Park, Prospect Hill Park, because it's passive and it's close to my house and passive.
Hi, my name is Tori Antonino. I am a member of Green and Open Somerville, and I love the Morse Kelly Butterfly Park Garden because it's one of our CPA projects, and it is there for people and pollinators, and it is popping. So go check it out. It's on Summer Street. Hi, everybody.
Hi, I guess I'll jump in. I'll go next. Hi, I'm Lee Munier, also a member of Green and Open Somerville, which is a member organization of a larger local coalition called the Climate Coalition of Somerville. So I participate in that as well. And oh man, my favorite green space. You know, I knew this question before coming in this evening and I didn't. I was like, it's just going to come to me. You know, I really loved, and I didn't get to take advantage of it enough, when I lived on Orchard Street. I lived in the big house with like 5, 6 people. We had chickens, I had a dog, and our backyard space there was not big, but it was magical, you know, and there was just a lot of wonderful wild things going on. We had a compost bin, there were lots of plants and a lot of energy. And I just felt like our little but beautiful and wild backyard with vines and blackberry bushes and all the good stuff was amazing. So I'm grateful for that time. And I guess I'll pass. I don't know if David Falk, if you want to jump in.
Hey, yeah, I'm David. I have been with Green and Open Somerville from pretty much the start, and I live in Somerville, right down the street from Anton, actually, and right near City Hall. I guess my favorite space, you know, I could definitely say the Growing Center is like such an amazingly unique little space. I also kind of want to say that I would like one of my favorite spaces to be Prospect Hill. There's so much potential on that hill, and we'll see how the city responds to our influence on how it gets greened.
Okay, everyone, I'm going to start because we want to get through our organizational and stuff so we can get to the highlight of the meeting, which is the 7 o'clock presentation about what to plant in your native garden. But anyone who did not get a chance to introduce themselves who would like to, please feel free to in the chat. We'd love to hear where you're coming from, what your interests are, and hope to meet you in person on whenever. I'm going to share my screen. And can everybody hear me? Someone can give me I'm not seeing any of you anymore, so if someone can just give me a verbal that they can hear me.
I hear you.
Awesome, thank you.
I think that means that probably everybody hears you, even if people are just listening in.
Perfect. Okay, so we've done our introductions, so let's see. Moving on. I'm going to put this up again at the end, but we have many different ways to be in touch with us and stay involved. The most basic way, you can always email us at greenopensomerville@gmail.com. You can ask us questions. You can report, you know, if there's a tree that looks like it's going to be cut down and you want to you're wondering if should be stopped or not, you can join our mailing list. Just ask us to put you on it. You can subscribe to our newsletter. Another way is Facebook. We're Green and Open Somerville on Facebook. And then our website is greenopensomerville.org. It is under construction right now, so feel free to look at it. There's good information on it, but know that soon it's going to be reorganized in hopefully a more convenient and understandable way. So organizational updates. We realized that we're really bad about talking about things that we do. And so people will say, oh, what are you doing now? And we're just, we realize, oh, we should have told people. So we're doing a few things to try to correct that. One is, as I mentioned, we're overhauling our website. We also have started a newsletter, which currently will be coming out every 2 months. It may become more frequent than that, but at this point, we're sort of going for an every 2 month update. And we would love to have you subscribe and stay involved with project we're working on and ways you can be involved. We try to do events. We're trying to up that as well. So actively have events that people can engage in, around once a month or more, depending. Obviously, summer months are a bit more busier, easier to do things. But so the newsletter is a good way to stay involved with that. We're trying to reach more people. We would love help spreading the word. We're not very good at outreach. We've had some sort of outreach meetings and ways to try to brainstorm ways we can be better, but we're pretty bad at it. So we would love it if people have ideas. Shoot us an email. Tell your friends about us. We really want to work. We're working in Somerville. We really want to work for the town, for the community in ways that are needed. So, we all have things that we think are important to do, but I'm sure all of you could come up with 2 or 3 things that we have never even thought about that would be really important to you and ways to make our natural environment healthier. We also are going to be hosting monthly gatherings. So this is one of them. Some of them will be Zoom meetings. Hopefully soon they can be in-person meetings. Some of them will be, it could be events where we're pulling invasives together, or we're working on a community garden or something. So the best way to learn about those is, surprise, surprise, newsletter, Facebook, or our mailing list. So some of the projects we've been working on, oops, sorry about that. Something we've been working on throughout the winter actually is the Washington Street Triangle Planter Project. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's a pretty unpleasant section of Union Square. It's right where the McGrath overpass and Medford Street and Washington Street come together. It's often under construction. There's usually traffic backed up, and it smells like exhaust, and it's paved and not lit well and really unpleasant. And so we have been working since, I believe, around November, bringing in some planting containers that actually Amy Myrtle has been doing a pollinator study on. And we moved those in from other locations where they had been in the summer and needed to be moved. And so we put them in between the 2 raised sidewalks. And in the beginning, really just put we went to Ricky's and we got some greenery and put them in just to make them look a little like there was a little bit of life in there. And then this spring we cleaned them out, and we are actually now applying for a permit to activate the space. And so our dreams are to bring in a bunch of soil and plant native plants and have, potentially could be where we have some starter trees that get moved to other places. We would like to show people that it's possible that you can have native plants surviving in an incredibly urban area. Don't tell anybody, but we painted the sidewalk. So we're trying to make it look nicer, and we'll show you now sort of our schematic of what we're sort of looking like. I mean, we may not actually have a statue, but we want to have it full of life, a nice, safe, healthy, happy place to walk through, and just full of plant life with native plants and the pollinators that would like to feed off of them. So that is what we're doing. We always welcome help if people want to come for a work day. Again, shoot us an email and we'll get you hooked up. Another event we're going to be, well, project, sort of an ongoing annual project, and something we're going to be doing soon is an invasives eradication event. Our first one is scheduled for Memorial Day, which is Monday, May 31st from 10 a.m. to noon. We would welcome anyone who wants to join us for any part of that. If you want to keep going afternoon, you're welcome to. The sort of some of the big three problems around here, there are more, but ones that we constantly come across are Japanese knotweed, garlic mustard, and black swallowwort. They are each one nastier than the last, and they are growing everywhere. In the city, you may have gotten a flyer or a door hanger from the city. They're trying to, educate people on how to recognize these and pull them out. But we are going to be meeting. One group will meet at the Prospect Hill Monument to start. Bring gloves if you have them. We'll provide trash bags, and I guess if anyone has, like weeding tools, that would be helpful. If you have them, we'll have some as well. If there's enough interest, if someone says, "Oh, I really want to do a Davis Square one," or whatever, pick your neighborhood, let us know. That would be wonderful, and we'd be happy to help organize. We can definitely put the word out and, sort of sign you up as a leader. So we would be totally delighted if we had 4 or 5 different groups going out on Memorial Day to do this. So please let us know. Another thing we're working on is at some point this summer, hopefully pretty soon, we're going to launch a self-guided native plant garden tour. With COVID, we realized that probably having, led tours, we probably could do it, but just it's easier and gives people a nice thing to do when they can, is to have the self-guided tour. And so we're going to have, so far, I think we have about a dozen garden locations with varying degrees of native plants. Some people, like myself, we're in transition. We're partway there. Other people have 100% native plants. And so we are, anyway, so we're joining with the Mystic Charles Pollinator Pathways map. They're a group that's done a really lovely map that you can put your locations on there. We are, anyone who wants to be on our tour joins that, puts their location on that map, and then we will pull those people out for to have a nice map of those specific locations in Somerville that have decided that they want to be on our tour. We're going to advertise it, and we'll have signage, and hopefully you'll learn about native plants and see that they can be beautiful and that they're all around, and maybe you'll be inspired to do one yourself. If you have a garden that you would like to have on the tour, let us know. It's not too late to get on. It's something that will be ongoing, and so we can always add people later too, but we haven't launched yet, so we would be delighted to add you on as well. Related to that, we have on our website, we have printable yard signs. If you do want to advertise that your garden is native or it's in transition, or we have a couple different signs, so feel free to check those out. It's greenopensomerville.org/signs. We also have been working with our, I don't know if you'd call them our twin, but our cousin, our neighbor in Cambridge, on a couple different activities. We have been talking with Cambridge Mothers Out Front because they are working on an amazing green roof ordinance, and we just got our native plant ordinance passed. And so we have been having listening sessions to share with each other about how to try to, we would love to adopt a green roof ordinance, and they would love to adopt a native plant ordinance. They've also been educating us about, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, but Miyawaki forests, which can be incredibly small on small footprints of ground. They are very fast growing. I recommend you Google it. There's a lot of good information out there, but you can have a forest that would normally take 100 years to grow, and you can get them to be in about 30 years to be seem like a full mature forest. They are native plants, native trees, and we would love to find a location, could be as small as a few hundred square feet to start one. So if you have a spot, if you want us to use your backyard, let us know. We also have been working with Groundwork Somerville and Green Cambridge for a cross-community youth tree planting project. It's called the Canopy Crew, and their goal is to engage Somerville and Cambridge youth to plant. Their goal is to plant 800 trees a year. The kids would be given a stipend, and they'd be trained in, what trees to plant where and how to take care of them and how to plant them. So that's a really cool opportunity. Some really good groups working there, and we're sort of on an advisory role, and we're going to help them as when it's actually planting time. I think we'll step in and help. But it's been really fun to watch this program develop. So the super exciting thing for us is the native planting ordinance passed. It took us 3 years, and Tori, David, and Brendan and I worked with Katiana Ballantyne to pass it. Obviously, we all hoped it'd be 100% across the board, but that's unrealistic. And so we ended up with any new plantings going in 100% in riparian areas, so along rivers, along the community path, along the Greenland Extension Corridor, and with some exceptions in bioswales and streetscapes. I think there are times where the city might determine that they can't do native plants there, and those would be exempt. In parks, it will be 75% of trees and other plants, and then street trees is 50%, and these are minimum. So if the city chose to do 100%, they absolutely could, but they can't go below these minimums. There are exemptions, obviously, community gardens, extensive green roofs, because extensive green roofs are very shallow, and so it's hard to get anything much beyond sedum. But intensive green roofs would I'm not exactly sure what they would fall under. Maybe they would, I'm not sure actually the percentage. Athletic fields, because most grasses used on fields are not native, and then holiday and seasonal plantings were also exempt. It was really exciting to see this pass. It took a lot of time, a lot of negotiations, but we're pretty sure that we're the first in the country that has anything like this with required minimum percentages. We looked for precedents, because oftentimes, the city wants to see that someone else has done it first successfully, and we just couldn't find any other place that had it. And so we are pretty sure we're the first. So we're very proud of that. And now I'm going to pass it off to Lee, who's going to update us on other opportunities from some of our friends.
Hi, okay. And just while I'm speaking, if Renee or Tori, if someone could watch, I know we're joined by a couple of new people in the time that Renee was sharing. So I'm just asking my fellow organizers to just watch in case anybody else is coming in. I want to make sure people get to join us as soon as possible. So yeah, just really good to be here with you all. Maybe I'll just, since we just transitioned, just remind some people who have joined us in the last 15 minutes or so that we are recording this evening. And so again, if you don't necessarily want to have your face recorded, make sure to just have your video off for the duration of the rest of this meeting, the time that we're doing updates right now, and then for the talk that's going to be from 7 to 8 on planting natives in your garden. Yeah, so I wanted to just share, obviously we're not working in a vacuum, and the way that ecosystems work, they don't know the municipal boundaries and things that humans have made up, right? They're on natural systems and natural timelines. And so we also wanted to make sure we're lifting up some of the amazing work that our friends and parallel groups here in Somerville and then regionally are doing as well. And so just going to rattle off some of the things that you're seeing up here on the slide. One is the Mystic Charles Pollinator Pathways, which you've already heard Renee refer to, and that's like a regional effort, and I believe it's all volunteer run, again with a focus on increasing pollinator pathways in the Charles and Mystic regions. They right now they have a monthly meeting. I believe it's always the second Tuesday, 7:30 p.m. Please feel free to join them. You can check them out on Facebook. They're very easy to find. Again, and you don't need to have a Facebook account in order to find people on Facebook. And especially lifting up this coming meeting because Tori Antonino, who's here this evening with us from Green and Open, is going to be presenting more extensively on the native plant ordinance in that space. I'm sure that there's going to be other amazing opportunities to hear about the ordinance as well. And again, just want to reiterate, I know some people had asked about asking in the chat about the ordinance. So also just feel free to reach out to Green and Open, to reach out to us directly if you would like, to just talk directly with us about it. Another wonderful thing that's going on is in Arlington. So our neighbor Arlington is having a whole eco week, and that's going to be focused on things all over the environmental spectrum. And in addition to energy and buildings and whatnot, there's also going to be some focus on natural spaces, native plantings, pollinators, environmental justice issues, inclusivity and access to green spaces. And so they have two events that are going to be a part of that Eco Week, which again, if you do a search, an online search, you'll easily find. Just put in Arlington and Eco Week and it comes up right away. Two events that I wanted to lift up though in connection with that. This Sunday, May 9th in the afternoon, they're having one event that's focusing on identifying and cultivating native plants and pollinators. I believe someone from the Mystic Charles Pollinator Pathways is actually going to join that. They're going to talk about things like how you can use, people might not be familiar, but if you have a smartphone, there's something called iNaturalist, which is an app which allows you can just hold up your camera to any living being and it will help you to identify it. So they're going to show people how to access that app and how, again, in understanding how to use that app, you can feel empowered to learn more about native plants and pollinators nearby. And another part of that work is also going to be helping people to understand how to plant native plants in their gardens. Another event that they're going to be doing is on the 11th, 7 p.m. It's just called Outdoors for All, again, because the focus is on inclusion and welcoming spaces, creating inclusion and creating welcoming spaces for environmental stewardship in communities. Some other amazing organizations and opportunities, Earthwise Aware, which people may not be as familiar with, is here in Somerville, and they are actually working globally. They have ongoing events all the time that have a focus on citizen science. So how I mentioned that iNaturalist app, they are an organization that makes amazing use of that app to help collect data, like really important information that then goes into these national databases and helps larger organizations and research groups to understand right where biodiversity is lacking, which is probably mostly everywhere in the US. So just you can check out their website and learn about and how to protect regional local biodiversity through some of what they do, some nature walks. They do stuff at the Growing Center, out at the Middlesex Fells, and a couple other things that are just encourage you to check out. The Northeast, people might be familiar with NOFA, which is the national, I think it's regional. There's several different chapters. There's one here in Massachusetts though. And NOFA Mass is partnering with some other groups to put together a community pesticides reduction network. And so this is a group that's going to be actively focused on reducing toxins and pesticides, including the neonics and things that people might be familiar with here. And I actually understand in the passing of the native plant ordinance here in Somerville was a potentially contentious issue in terms of how to navigate that. So they're doing some wonderful work regionally, and I highly encourage you to check that out and join the network if you can. And then people might be familiar as well with Groundwork Somerville, which is actually a national organization. There's a local chapter here in Somerville that focuses on youth and volunteer efforts to increase urban agriculture spaces, especially in the city. We wanted to lift this up because this is an amazing youth opportunity. So if there are any youth on this call this evening and or you have kids, please let them know about this. People might be familiar with where the Market Basket is. If you go down the alley to the right, that whole alley is called Frost Alley and is being transformed. We just did a whole bunch of beautiful native planters down there. And another aspect of that work is going to be a garden design contest where Summer Nova, which oversees that space, wants to transform it in a way that is through broader community efforts, and that includes getting youth engaged. So please feel free to check out, again, they're calling it the Terra Nova Garden Design Contest, and it's an opportunity for local youth to get involved. And And yeah, so just if you go to the Groundwork Somerville website, it's pretty easy to find, or you can follow the link that's here on the slide. And I think I'm going to hand it back to Renee.
Thank you, Lee.
Yeah.
And once again, these are the different ways to keep in touch. And I'm delighted to introduce David Falk, who's one of our advisors and works at Garden in the Woods. And he is going to give us a delightful and informative presentation on what to plant in your native garden. David?
Okay, hi. And Tori's also going to be working with me on this. So Tori, did you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. So this is, you know, we love our non-native plants. It's what we've grown up with. It's what we're familiar with. But as more and more research comes out, we realize that we have done a really terrible thing in the choice of our plants, in addition to how we landscape. You know, and I want to say it's nobody's fault that this has become our habit of planting plants that are not indigenous with this area, that lack an evolutionary history, nor is it anyone's fault in terms of how we've been mowing our lawns and raking our leaves and using lots of noisy tools to do so. But now that we know that we need our native plants in order for this ecosystem to survive, that we need to change our landscaping practices in order for our ecosystem to survive, and that we really got to stop, using noisy, pollutive instruments in order to stop putting carbon in the air. So it's nobody's fault, but now we know. Since we know what we need to do, we have to make these changes. And it's very important. And it is relatively simpler. So slide. Okay. So in the early spring, late winter, we will start to see our snowdrops come up and our heliobor. And the only plant that I find to be its native equivalent in terms of bloom time is skunk cabbage. And it might even be a little bit after. Now, our snowdrops and our heliobor, they're pretty and they provide color, and people need their souls to be uplifted in February after in the midwinter. But these are ornamental plants. They don't do anything, unfortunately, to support our pollinators. And when we have these plants in our yard, they not only do they take up space, but it gives the cue to other people that these are the plants that you want. Look, aren't they beautiful? But they're not contributing. And so hopefully as we progress, we want to change our preferences and learn to fall in love with new plants. So so there's our skunk cabbage under the native plant. It is, for me, I think it is one of the most fascinating, beautiful plants there is. And after that, in March, you're going to start to have the bloodroot, your Canada anemone, and your Ozark blue star. I have not seen an Ozark blue star, but I heard they're lovely. And so again, these are the plants to the right that we want you to plant. And crocuses, they're beautiful. They're everywhere. Let's try to start getting the plants, our native plants, in our yards. And David, at the end, if you have anything to contribute, just jump in.
Well, can I add a couple things now?
I would love it. Yes.
Yeah. So early season flowers are fairly tree dominated. So some of the most important things that we can be planting for early season is actually our native maples, and birches are done flowering. So, some of these are wind pollinated, but that doesn't necessarily mean that pollinators don't actually collect some of that pollen, like bees. And early season, we're also talking about a very limited number of insects that we probably are supporting. And there's not a whole lot of people out there that even really know what is going on, you know, who is out there alive right now. And the way the pollinators really work is, for the most part, they have short lifespans. And so you have certain bees and things are flying around right now, they'll disappear in a month, and another set will show up and take over for them. So again, it's very important to have the plants that they are looking for. Some of the things that that I would love to add to this list are very hard plants to find unless you're out in the wild. And they're still hard to find now because of so much development. But we have woodland ephemerals in Northeast New England, and there are things like the native bleeding heart, which is the Dicentra species, which is blooming now. There are really beautiful, a really important plant that I think has a lot of potential in a city is the native, the New England trout lily, which is finished flowering basically by now, and will be going dormant, and you won't even know it's there pretty soon. And there's also another wonderful small bulb that I think was here a lot more, and it is native here. And I've only seen it really in large numbers down in Pennsylvania, but it's called Spring Beauties, or Claytonia, Claytonia virginiana, I believe. And it's a gorgeous little pink and white flower that is really a kind of a woodland edge flower that grows really well in a variety of situations, as long as it gets early season sun. Not easy plants to find in the nursery trade, I'm afraid, but there are a few places, and the more people looking for them, the more there will be. They're easy plants to get to proliferate in your landscape, actually, because they are plants that very readily set seed.
All right, we'll go to the next slide, and thank you so much for your input, David, and continued input. Okay, so on your left, we have the herald of spring, or the horror of spring. It is the forsythia. You know, it is what we've grown up with, what we know, but I challenge anyone to bring me a picture of a bee on that flower that is not sleeping. So instead of our forsythia, what we plant is our spice bush, our Lindera benzoin. And spice bush is ironically known as wild forsythia. Again, that sort of tells you our addiction to our non-native plants. So that is going to give that sort of timeline for our early pollinators. And as David said, they might only, be here for a few weeks or a month, and oftentimes very very simultaneous of when these plants bloom. So there's a very special evolutionary relationship with not just in what is accessible for bees, but the times that they bloom. Another favorite is going to be your pussy willow. I learned recently that these are dioecious, which means there's a male and a female plant. And there's a female pussy willow at the growing center, and its flowers have a greenish color to them, and they're lovely. So they are going to be, that's going to be your replacement for forsythia. And it's not just pussy willows. All willow trees, our native willows, are going to be important, and maples. as David suggested. So trees are our meadows in the sky. So they're going to give us the most bang for our buck. So if you have a place for a willow in your landscape or a maple, I mean, ultimately the oak is your powerhouse, but just to get these spring bloomers, our willows and our maples are very important. And let's make spice bush the new forsythia. Okay, slide. So what are we going to put in for our tulips, our hyacinth, and all these, you know, spring plants that we know and love? Well, I just want to say, who wore it better? Virginia bluebells are blooming at the same time as hyacinth. And for those who say that we don't have the showy plants, Virginia bluebells is as showy as they come. And so Virginia bluebells have just bloomed, and picking up where they left off are woodland phloxes, or sweet williams. Slide. And daffodils and scilla, we need replacements for those. And David, I think a good plant to replace our daffodils is going to be the trout lily. I forgot to put it in here. But other plants are your rue anemones, your Zizia alexanders, which are just starting to bloom now, or at least mine are, our native celandine poppy, and our tiarella foam flower. There's also we have a lesser celandine and a greater celandine, which the greater celandine looks similar to our native celandine poppy, and the greater is invasive. So you're going to have to make if you haven't planted it there intentionally, it's most likely going to be the non-native. So these are the plants we need you guys to fall in love with. Okay, slide. Vinca and Pachysandra are ones that come up. I'm on a lot of native plant forums, and these are ones that come up. What do we plant instead of the Vinca? Vinca flowers pretty early. So I was hoping that our woodland phlox would provide the one-to-one color and one bloom time, but I do need to find a plant that's blooming a little earlier than the woodland phlox to replace the Vinca. But so far the woodland phlox is coming to the top for me as your Vinca replacement. If you want to mix in, go for it.
Another option, which is a little bit less native maybe than the woodland phlox, but is pretty close, probably New York and Pennsylvania, is the barren strawberry, or a Geum fragiloides, which is like Vinca, at least evergreen. May not look quite as good as Vinca does in the middle of the winter, but it does cover the ground with green all year round. So, and it's flowering right about now, actually. So it's also a little bit after Vinca, I guess, but.
I was thinking as well, the Christmas fern, I think that's going to make another good replacement for your Pachysandra and your Vinca in terms of it being evergreen.
Absolutely.
Again, might not look as robust, but it's still going to give you that green ground cover. But some other examples, this is on the left, that's wild ginger. I took that picture today. It is, there's a flower in there. It's yellow. It is yet to be pollinated. I don't know the pollinator that loves the wild ginger, but I'm very interested in keeping my eye
It's a
out
beetle.
for it. Is
It's
it
a
a beetle?
Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Because I was, yeah. Oh, that's exciting. But it has like little yellow anthers in there. So that should be interesting to watch that progression. And then up above here, we have dwarf crested iris. Now they're not going to bloom till middle, well, till later in May. And this picture was taken at the growing center. And then to the right there, we have your Anium maculatum, or our crane's bill. And that photo was taken at the Morse Kelly Park. And I got, in my most recent shipment for natives, I got our native Pachysandra, or our Allegheny spurge. And it has very similar leaves to the Pachysandra that we're used to, but they're less shiny, which is interesting because the wild ginger is less shiny than our non-native ginger, and so is the Pachysandra. I just thought that was interesting. Our native Pachysandra is not evergreen, but I think it's absolutely beautiful.
It's almost evergreen. It will hold on
Is
to
it?
its leaves. They just won't look so great at the end of winter, but
And that's another sort of thing we might need to make an adjustment towards, and that is like the expectation that has come with the way we've landscaped. We're going to have to embrace these changes, and some are going to be subtle, and some are going to be more like, where's my Lenten rose? It's February. Like, we just need to make a commitment in our expectations, because it's about our pollinators, and without our pollinators, not only do we not get to survive on this planet, but we're putting a whole lot of other creatures in danger by the way we've come to control our landscape.
there's a quick question in the chat. The crane's bill, the wild geranium, is not a spreader. It's a clump forming plant. It does set seed if the conditions are right. And in my experience, it needs a little bit of bare ground, and it likes a moist soil for germination, more consistent moisture. It is a drought tolerant plant, but I don't see it spreading unless it has a little bit more moisture. So it could be something that you water, and the seed is actually, you cannot store the seed of wild geranium. It needs to drop freshly on the ground basically, and it will germinate quickly if the conditions are right.
Cool. Lee, I'm not watching the chat at all, so if people have questions and they're relevant to a certain slide, just shoot them, just say them. Thanks for David for keeping an eye on that. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So exciting. Okay, this is an important one. And in terms of our attachment, because Lily of the Valley, they remind us of our grandparents, our moms, our dads, but they are a hugely invasive plant, and with little to no value to our pollinators. So what do we have to put in their place? And though the one-to-one comparison I find, it's not the same bloom time, but their leaves and their flowers are similar enough, and that is the Canada Mayflowers. You will find underneath pine trees, the forest floor is covered with these little guys. They're less tall. They're about 3 inches, their leaves, and so 4 inches total with their flower stalk. But these are the ones that we want to get going. And once you start them, they will take off. but not in a way that will also encroach on everything else that you're growing. A great flower comparison, you'll find your high bush and your low bush blueberries have this little bell-shaped flower that is people find so sweet and lovely about the lily of the valley. So those are the two that I came up with. And I guess your foam flower might be kind of similar, but so as you make your efforts to get the lily of the valley out, think about popping in some low bush blueberry, some tiarella, and some of your Canada Mayflowers. And there are not as many sources for the Canada Mayflowers, but I do believe they have them at Garden in the Woods. Am I lying, David?
I think we do. It's also such a ubiquitous plant that I would never tell anybody to go dig anything up in the wild, but it's a very easy plant to transplant. I'm not saying that for any particular reason, but it seems to be a highly valuable ecological plant. And even if it was just something that you mixed in with something like lily of the valley, then you're actually at least introducing the plant that will support the other life in the garden. Both the blueberry and the Canada Mayflower are powerhouses for our early seasonal pollinators. They're both blooming now. If you go to the fells, they are everywhere. And they are both dry upland, woodland plants that used to just cover the ground around here.
Yeah, and I want people to start thinking about low bush blueberries as ground cover. You know, technically ground cover is going to be anything that covers the ground. But I think when it's sort of said commonly, we think of plants that are, maybe 3 to 4 inches tall. But start incorporating low bush blueberry as ground cover. It is also, I think, number 5 on Doug Tallamy's famous list of your top woody plants for Lepidoptera, and Lepidoptera are your butterflies and moths. So it's a great plant for Lepidoptera hosting capacities.
There might not be a more important plant in our understory than the low bush blueberry. High up there, also very closely related, is huckleberry. They're definitely both woodland ground covers. The only trick is that they're ericaceous plants and they are very reliant on fungus in the soil. And so if anybody has planted a low bush blueberry in the city, you can have failures. And it's because the soil is no longer supporting the fungus that they're completely reliant on, basically. Using some fresh wood chips and leaving woody debris on the ground and leaf litter is basically the solution to that problem. That is a natural way to acidify the soil, which they also love. And that ends up being what they feed off of. All of that litter on the ground is what fungus breaks down and then and basically feeds the blueberry with. And so it can be an incredibly tough, resilient plant in very droughty New England conditions, but it does take a slightly less managed garden. You do not want to be using bark mulch around blueberries. Fresh wood chips is ideal, and leaf litter.
So in August,
Tori, but before you both move on, just a clarifying question around which ones are available at the fells?
You will find all these plants at the fells.
Okay.
Yes, I don't want to say that they're available at the fells because I'm not saying go dig them up at the fells, but you will find them ubiquitous at the fells.
Right.
and you'll be able to check out, you know, their blooms, and so that's where you find them.
The only
Yeah,
place that I know of that you can actually purchase all these plants is where I work, which is Garden in the Woods. I'm not trying to sell anybody on Garden in the Woods. There are some nurseries that you can order from that may have most of them too. But if anybody is looking to purchase these plants, I would not look much further than Framingham.
I support that. There are other nurseries I know that are getting started. I just am not familiar with them, but
You can find some of these plants at Mahoney's too. Mahoney's will definitely have low bush blueberry, and they may even have Canada Mayflowers, but others they won't. Yeah. So should we move on?
yeah, sure. Okay. So on the left, you'll see bleeding hearts, and a lot of people think, oh, those are bleeding hearts, they're native, but the ones you see on the left that have that little white, that white part at the bottom, that's actually our that's Dicentra speciosa, which is the non-native. So the native is Dicentra examina, and that's on the far right. And I think that's the picture. After I posted it, I'm like, did I just post a picture of the non-native Cordalis? But I think that's our bleeding heart. You'll be able to tell because the leaves are a lot featherier, and they bloom all summer long, especially in a shady area. They will reseed prolifically. They're really exciting. Another Dicentra are Dutchman's breeches, because that's what someone thought they looked like. And they've just bloomed, or mine are done blooming. And these plants, the Dutchman's breeches, and if you have bleeding heart the native bleeding heart in a sunny location, they will go to sleep in a few weeks, and another plant will take their place. So these are ephemerals. And then this one below here, this rock harlequin, is Cordalis, and someone posted it on one of the native plant groups I belong to, and I'm just like, that is gorgeous. I'm not sure where to find it yet, but Cordalis sempervirens, so keep your eye out for that. All right, David, anything to add?
No, just that the Dutchman's breeches, the Dicentra cucullaria, is the most native of all these, which is, it would have been here in our woods, and maybe still be able to be found in the fells and around here. It is a wonderful plant that will spread. It competes with absolutely nothing. So it creates a mass of little tiny bulbs underground, and so it will spread both asexually, and it will also create seed and spread sexually. And slowly, it's like a slowly moving ground cover that's about 3 inches tall, and covers the forest floor with this absolutely beautiful blue green in early spring. And then it goes dormant within a few weeks. You won't know it's there, and then your ferns and things will take over for it and cover the ground. I think that the Cordalis is, I have no idea if you could actually find that in the nursery trade. I think that is a plant that is a high pH loving plant. So I think it's more native to Western Mass, where there's more limestone and less acidic soils, but that makes it a real a candidate to actually thrive in the city, where our soils tend to be much less acidic due to all the concrete. It also loves dry conditions. It has a lot of potential. I just have no idea if anybody would actually sells it.
All right, to be continued. All right, so these are, so to the left we have Speedwell, and then the bottom we have the yellow archangel or lamium. There's also another dead nettle similar to the yellow archangel that has pink flowers. And so on some of the native gardening forums I'm on is this reasoning that we should be leaving a lot of these flowers in our lawns because it's what the early pollinators need. And things have been getting kind of dicey, where people are arguing, no, we need to keep the creeping Charlie, no, we need to keep the Speedwell. We have to keep these plants and the lamium and the dead nettle, because what else are our pollinators going to feed on? And so here is what else our pollinators are going to feed on. Our wild strawberry, and that's coming into bloom right about now. It mixes in with a lawn. If for those who have lawns and want to sort of, start to switch to more of an alternative lawn. Bluets, which are, I don't have any in my yard, but I took these in took this picture in a cemetery. And I just think they're amazing, low growers. Pussy toes, which will bloom in a couple of weeks. I want these to become the new dandelion. People say, oh, we need to keep our dandelions because bees need them. We need to find the plants that are going to bloom, our native plants that are going to bloom early enough to feed the bees. And once these little guys, once their seed heads to seed, you can make wishes on them and just let the seeds fly. They're such a sweet little plant. Below, violets are blooming right now, and they're a very important host plant for the fritillary butterfly. And then on the right is your moss phlox that you'll see a lot right now flowing over rock walls. But it works itself well into a grass-like lawns. Violets are they work well in the shade, and your wild strawberry is going to work well in the shade too.
Yeah, real quickly, I'm glad to see violets mentioned. They're difficult to purchase, but they are actually a really important plant this time of year. And there is a violet for almost any condition native to New England. So I wish I could offer people violets for sale. It's not that easy, but and maybe really quickly, I would like to make a quick plug for some of the other ground covers that we've been missing. And those are our grasses and sedges that are really some of the most important plants other than our trees. And some of these, like Pennsylvania sedge is one of the most common plants in New England, and will grow in the most diverse places. So we're talking about a very dry, loving, creeping sedge that can basically look like a lawn. It is evergreen for the most part, and the leaves will brown up at the ends late in the season and over the winter, but some of the plant stays green all winter long. And then there are also a couple of different New England grasses that grow in the shade that are bright green right now and growing. And these are plants that host a lot of life, a lot of insect life that overwinter in the ground underneath these leaves, and then the newborn insects eat these leaves, early in the season. So you have a lot of things like sparrows hopping around on the ground, juncos and things. And that's what they're looking for. They're looking for these little larval stage insects that are hiding and eating a lot of our grasses, sedges, violets, and things like wild strawberry too. So yes, there's a whole list of these plants. It's really hard to put into a slideshow like this, but certainly going to the Native Plant Trust website is helpful. And I don't know, I think also maybe Doug Tallamy's books may have good lists of some of these plants. And then you can also get in touch with us and send it. I'm happy to answer emails too, and in more detail than we can go into tonight. Go ahead, Tori.
All right, let's go to the next slide. Oh, everyone's favorite, lilacs. You know, they are beautiful. They smell amazing. Are we saying to take down all of your lilacs? Well, no, not all, but maybe a few. And plant some shrubbery that is somewhat comparable. We have our Cornus Florida, our flowering dogwood. Red, that is about to burst open right now. That's something you can find commonly at your nursery. Cherries, we really need to start planting more cherries, because cherries are going to provide, they are going to provide for your pollinators now. They're going to provide food for the wildlife once all the flowers go to berry, and they are an excellent host plant for your Lepidoptera. And they're beautiful, and I think they smell delicious. So your cherries, your dogwoods, and then I just threw in, there's your redbud. Beautiful, wonderful little pollinator plant. And yeah, those are my suggestions for that. I figured we could maybe go through these slides so people can ask questions. So serviceberry, for every calorie pear that is in our city, I just want to like wiggle my nose and make it into a serviceberry. They bloom a little bit after our calorie pear. I don't even want to call it our calorie pear, the calorie pear, but I think it'll make a perfect little street tree replacement. And then elderberry, that's going to bloom in about 2 or 3 weeks, but I still think it would be an interesting plant to start incorporating into our city landscapes. Slide. I'm sure many of you guys know the problem with lupin and Miss Rumphius. So we have our native sundial lupin, which has 7 leaves. But what happened was this sort of large leaf lupin that has 11 to 13 leaves became popular in the nursery industry. And it was also a plant that the real Miss Rumphius is a character in a children's story where this woman tries to do this wonderful thing, which is to beautify the Maine's highways. And she does it by planting this big leaf lupin because it's so beautiful. But what happened was that this big leaf lupin started taking over, and the Carner blue butterfly, which depends on the wild lupin, has come endangered, because not only did the big leaf lupin take over, it also started hybridizing with the sundial or common lupin, and that hybridization made it impalpable for Carner blue butterfly. So can you have both lupins in your garden? This one is going to be a hard no. You have to take out leaf lupin, because if you want the Carner blue butterfly back, it has to be the straight species of your sundial or native lupin. And this was growing at City Hall. I thought I had planted our native lupin, but a few years in, I realized, nope, it wasn't. And I tore it out, and I would not give it to anybody. Luckily, there was no one around to ask me to give it to them. But I did cut off the blooms and put them in a vase. But we need to make the transition to the sundial lupin. Okay, slide. Okay, foxglove. This is something that is a beautiful plant. Digitalis purpurea. What do we plant instead? We plant our Penstemon digitalis, which is our foxglove beard tongue. And for your purple color, we're gonna ask you to plant vervain. The hoary, all of these pictures, the first two, the foxglove and the foxglove beard tongue, were taken in my front yard. And the hoary vervain can be found at Morse Kelly. I don't want you to dig it up, but it will go to seed. And when it does, I give you permission to take some seeds. Okay, any thoughts, David?
No, just that there's
Okay.
there's
Daylilies.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, go for it. Go for it.
There are a couple other varieties of those, the penstemon and the verbena. So, but those were great. And yeah.
I'm very sorry. I have somehow got us going the wrong way. Apologies. I'm going to work on this.
That's all right.
One more.
Okay, just quickly.
There you go.
So daylilies, orange daylilies are invasive in many states, and it is illegal to sell them or propagate them, the orange ones, in Delaware, because Delaware recently passed some strong legislation on making it illegal to sell certain invasive plants. But people, what are the plants we are going to replace these with? And the main one is for bloom time and for color, it's going to be your butterfly weed. Butterfly weed is it is a milkweed plant, so it is going to support the monarch caterpillars and butterflies, and this color is unrivaled, so beautiful. We also have our native Turk's cap lily, which will give you that sort of shape of the flower that we've become fond of with our daylily. I put in red columbine. That's starting to bloom now, so it's a little bit earlier than when our daylilies are going. The daylilies are going to come out, but I put it in there for the tubular shape. And lance-leaf coreopsis and harebell also bloom at the same time. And the red columbine and the lance-leaf coreopsis, you can find those blooming at City Hall. And harebell, that's something that has been used, that we use at Morse Kelly, and it is it's beautiful in drifts, and I think I just had to get it in here somewhere. So, all right. Okay, butterfly bush, another controversial plant. Do you need to take your butterfly bush out? So many bees come to it, so many butterflies. I'm not going to take my butterfly bush out. Please do. We're setting a bad example by keeping them. They're going to spread to your neighbor's yard. Your neighbor's going to get a plant and say, "Yeah, I got a butterfly bush. Look at the bees, look at the butterflies. It can't be bad." Yes, it is bad. It doesn't host any of our native Lepidoptera, our butterflies and our moths. Once it gets going, it gets bigger and seeds itself into others' property. And then people think it's okay. It's okay to have it. No, please take out your butterfly bush. Please stop purchasing them, because we have all the plants. Slide.
I'm not going to contradict Tori, but I'm going to say, if you will not take out your butterfly bush, then it would be fantastic if you would plant some goldenrod with it. You can at least host your butterflies as well as attract them. They'll come to the goldenrod by itself, but you can have both.
No, you can't. Just kidding.
Right. Sorry.
Well, and these types of conversations actually are pretty common. David and I will get into it every now and again about what you can have and can't have. But goldenrod is super important, as you see in another slide. But here are some what bushes, what shrubs do you want to plant? You want to get your steeple bush and you want to get your button bush. Both these pictures were taken at the Fells. You can see that they're pretty much growing in water, but steeple bush will grow in a meadow as well. And my button bush is doing pretty well for not being near water. So two lovely plants. They're actually in ecoregions together. And your clethra, a wonderful shade-loving plant that'll give you the most gorgeous smell, perfect understory, and then your New Jersey tea. So we have the plants. Slide. And for our herbaceous replacements for butterfly bushes, these are what we want to have. First, you have to have your milkweeds, and in the upper left, that's your swamp milkweed that's taken in front of my house. Common milkweed down the bottom. If there's never been a worse name. It is neither common nor a weed, and it has the most gorgeous smell. That smell rivals lilacs, in my opinion. You want to have your yarrow and your echinacea. Look at those bees loving it. And blue vervain, which is different than your hoary vervain. Blue vervain is described as a swamp loving, a wet loving plant, but this one grows in the cracks of sidewalks, and it's growing in one of the most a highly dog used place at the garden at City Hall. And so, like many wetland plants, it defies its category, and I think because of its specialized adaptations to extract oxygen from hard to extract for places that don't have a lot of oxygen, it grows well in the exact opposite conditions than what it's described as, which would be a wetland plant, very good for droughty, salty conditions. And then below, please plant your Joe Pye weed, and please plant the goldenrod, because goldenrod is one of your top plants for pollinators and for hosting Lepidoptera. I think we're getting to the end. And here are a few more other plants. Your black-eyed Susans, they will flower all summer long, but they will be pollinated fairly quickly, and you won't be able to tell that they're pollinated necessarily. So these are plants that you can cut back to extend their pollinating potential. But then I'd say, like, stop cutting back maybe in September, so then they will go to seed, and you'll have seeds for the birds and for reseeding purposes. And this picture on the left was taken at City Hall in Somerville, I should say, in July. And that's when you have your monarda, your bee balm is hopping, and then the back is your swamp milkweed, which blooms a little bit later than the common milkweed. And then there's some Joe Pye on the left. And don't forget the goldenrod. These on the left, on the right is just the Canada goldenrod. I love it. I love to have it in my garden, because then I can just take it out and put it in tree wells, and it seems to do quite fine. And I think on the left, that's the Canada goldenrod too, but I know there's anise goldenrod in the City Hall garden. So goldenrod again is number 2 on the list of herbaceous plants, of Doug Tallamy's herbaceous plants that support your Lepidoptera. So the first one is aster and the second one is goldenrod. And goldenrod and aster both provide late season food for our pollinators. And okay, this is another what to plant instead of Rose of Sharon. Yes, they're beautiful and they are invasive and they spread. And we have the most beautiful hibiscus, which is our Crimson Eye Rose Mallow. This is at City Hall. These plants get to about 5 feet tall. I like to combine them with the New York ironweed, which you'll see in the background, and in the foreground to the right, you'll have your great blue lobelia. And this was taken in August of a couple years ago. So don't dismay. We have our mallows, and once we get these going in our gardens, it'll be like Rose of Sharon. Who? Okay, what do we got left? All right, mums. Okay, so mums are we're gonna have to cut off our mum supply on a few different levels. Again, I want someone, when you see a bit, take a picture and send it to me. And if there is a bee on it, it might be feeding, but it could very well die because mums are notorious for being treated with neonicotinoids, which are it's a class of pesticides that incorporates itself into the plant and is going to stay there for years. I've heard studies where like, oh, maybe after 3 or 4 years, it is no longer effective, but I don't know. I'm distrustful when it comes to the pesticide industry. But these pictures were taken in August and then in October, or August through September, I should say. So a sneezeweed, a lovely little pollinator plant. Don't forget your asters, and brown-eyed Susans, I think are just a wonderful little plant to have for all season interest. And so yeah, these pictures it's to anticipate changing our expectations. So this was taken, this picture on the left, I mean, undeniably beautiful, right? Look at these little strips of petunias, and this, like, it's a bit higher on the right with your alyssum, and there's some verbena in there, some Shasta daisies, and I think there's some phlox. Yes, it's gorgeous. This landscaper did a really nice job, but we need to start getting our eyes accustomed to the picture on the left. And I admit that is my garden spilling over the edge, and it's a different look, and we can achieve this look on the left. We do have plants. We can put, butterfly weeds in there and echinacea in there, which, is going to get 3 to 4 feet tall, and some of our own geraniums. We can get that look, but we also need to get comfortable with the quote unquote messy or wild look, because on the right, the picture on the right, that is going to provide overwintering habitat. I don't cut that back ever. Actually, I decided I just as the stems fall, I just let them fall. So this is an example of managing and preparing our expectations, as well as changing the way that we tend to our gardens. And all right, so this picture on the right, this was taken October 9th in 2019. That's at the Morse Kelly Butterfly Garden. And funnily enough, we didn't have much or any bee balm of the spotted bee balm last year. And I think that's an example of how your landscapes, when you do sort of a more of a wild garden, they're going to change a lot more. And that's part of the process, as you might not have as much seed fall or spotted bee balm are, they're short-lived perennials, so they're not going to come back necessarily year after year with the same vigor. So sorry to speed through at the end, but I wanted to have time for people's questions. And I know that's a lot, and thanks to everyone for your patience.
Yeah, and maybe if it's okay, thank you, Tori and David, for just like all the wisdom and insights there, both that were scripted in advance and just sort of what emerged in this space. There was a lot of emergence from people here as well who are participating tonight. So just gratitude on what people have shared so far. There have been a couple questions in the chat. I'm happy to lift them up. And then if there are additional questions, again, people are welcome to still continue to use the chat or just, use the raise your hand function if you're familiar with that, or take yourself off, put the camera on and let us know that you'd like to speak. One of the questions, and I know, David, you sort of were starting to get this a little bit by mentioning Garden in the Woods, but is there a list or can there be, this is from Christopher. So Christopher, also feel free to elaborate. Is there a list or can there be a list of nurseries for supply? So know what you both have to share on that. Sources.
Yes, we could throw together a list. I guess maybe we should have it on our website instead of me reciting a few places. I think the only thing that you're going to find is that when you're looking for wildflowers, it's best to try to find locally adapted plants grown from locally adapted seed. And in that case, I think Native Plant Trust is the only place that is collecting seed. Well, actually, you can get seed from Wild Seed Project. You can't get plants from Wild Seed Project, but you can get seed. And then there's some other great nurseries that are definitely growing a lot of these plants. The seed may be collected down in Pennsylvania or New Jersey, but they are very, very close to being the same plants. So some of these nurseries, like North Creek Nursery, is a large scale nursery doing really, that produces really good plants. Arc Wild or Arch Wild is another nursery down in Pennsylvania that's where we got our plants for the Morse Kelly Butterfly Garden and for the Growing Center. And they produce generally really good plugs. And this is what you're buying plants in bulk from both of these places. So you're probably buying 30 individuals of a particular species or 50, depending on what size of tray that you're gonna order. Those are two good solid nurseries that have pretty large selection.
And not all, but some of your wholesale nurseries are going to require a certain amount of a bulk. So if you want to go in with your neighbors and get a group of people to, because usually it's going to come in like flats of 30 to 50 to 72. So, get a few of your neighbors together, get 4 flats of plants and and go in together and share the love.
A couple other nurseries that come to mind are actually Prairie Moon. They are out in Wisconsin, I believe. So again, those plants are coming from seed collected out there. But I do believe that with Prairie Moon, you can actually order a mixed tray of a few different species. And another good nursery I think is called I think it's called Blue Moon. Blue Moon Nursery also has a great website that they have great plant descriptions, and they have really good recommendations for companion plants on their website. And I believe the plant material is pretty high quality.
Thank you for that. I just want to, there are a couple other questions that have come up in the chat. Want to recognize time as well. Precious to all of us. Jenna had asked a question earlier. I think you started to make some recommendations about a couple of shade plants, but I don't know, maybe elaborate a little bit more on her question. And Jenna, please feel free to elaborate maybe in terms of maybe where your question is coming from, or if you have more specifics there. Any recommendations for indirect and low sunlight plants?
Well, there are a lot that you could recommend. What I'm trying to think of is a good source for finding more information about that. There are a couple good books on woodland gardening. I think there's a book by Rick Dark that has a good list of woodland plants. You just have to, we could talk plants all night. We just need more specifics about your situation to really get into it.
So I have an empty plot in the backyard that is shaded by trees. So I was just looking for things to start planting there that would be native.
So first thing you want to do is start, addressing the soil by leaving your leaf litter. A lot of woodland plants are highly dependent on the duff layer. And generally what we do with our managed landscapes is we remove all that material every year. And that's where all the soil life happens. And so a lot of your woodland plants are really dependent on that. They thrive in the situation where they grow early in the season before the leaves of the trees come out. And the soil is generally very moist at this time of year. And then when things dry out and the sun disappears, they generally go dormant. And there are other woodland plants that will take over for them later in the season. But there's things like sanguinaria, bloodroot is a very tough, plant of Massachusetts that can do really well in our kinds of shady conditions. Mixing that with Pennsylvania sedge, Carex pennsylvanica, which is a spreading ground cover, something like that does a lot for holding your leaves in place over the winter time, and building up the organic matter that will basically make everything in your garden thrive. And so I love Pennsylvania sedge personally. And then Pennsylvania sedge is also not a very highly competitive plant. So things like woodland phlox, creeping phlox, grows right through it. And so you can still get broad-leaved plants that grow with Pennsylvania sedge, but they'll all be more resilient when they're growing in a tight-knit group. And then you could start, eventually as your soil kind of builds up after 5 years or so, you can start even, playing around with things like trilliums. Another solid plant that is not necessarily New England native, but is very similar to bloodroot is Jeffersonia. Twin leaf is a drought tolerant early bloomer with very, very attractive foliage. And then I would try to remember your late season. So white wood aster is usually considered a weed around here. It is one of the most important plants in our landscape. And it also is it's a gorgeous plant. It has a beautiful blue with red in its leaf. Early season, it looks great just for foliage texture. And then when everything in the woodland is done flowering, your white wood aster is going to flower. And your pollinators are just starved for it, basically. I use white wood aster in the harshest conditions. It may spread around, and it will spread by rhizomes slowly, but it mixes great with things. And if you have a Norway maple, that's the kind of plant that you need. You can also play with some goldenrods. Goldenrods are notoriously aggressive plants, but some of these really aggressive plants are much less aggressive in dry shade. And so there are a few goldenrods that you can try. One of them that is native to a dry, shady condition is Solidago. Solidago's goldenrods, Caesia, Caesia. Solidago caesia is one of the less aggressive goldenrods. You will find it in our parks around here. It grows in shaded environments, in upland conditions, dry conditions. It's clump forming. It's blue-stemmed goldenrod is the common name, blue-stemmed goldenrod. Another great late season flower for dry shade. Another plant that I love, that I would love to see the city use more of, but it is a plant that is intensely aggressive. It's Canadian anemone, or Anemone canadensis. It is a beautiful plant, has foliage similar to geranium. While geranium is a very lobed leaf, it has a big white flower that is late spring, early summer. It is an important pollinator plant around here, but it spreads amazingly. So it will spread underground by rhizome, and it will spread also by seed, and will show up in other parts of your garden. This is a plant that grows aggressively in wet, sunny conditions, but if you have dry shade, it is just a solid, persistent plant that doesn't generally, I haven't seen it get really out of control.
What's the name again?
Sorry,
Sorry.
Anemone canadensis. A couple other really nice sedges that are more ornamental maybe are the broadleaf sedges. There's Carex platifolia and Carex plantagenea, like plantain-leaved sedge. And they're both clump forming, broad-leaved, evergreen, and can be really pretty drought tolerant. They mix wonderfully with things because you get it's almost like a fern where you get a clump of something and a mass of other things. And they're mostly for texture, but the flowers are nice if you like small flowers.
Thank you.
So I had just made a note in the chat. I just wanted to recognize recognizing time, but at the same time, if people don't have anywhere to go who are still here, I know there were a couple other questions from the chat that I can still share here if people want to stick around and hear the responses. I just wanted to check in too. So Renee, Tori, and David, kind of how you're all feeling, or anybody else who wants to stay on. Oh, good.
We can talk a couple more questions maybe.
Sure. So, and again, if anybody who needs to go, your time is yours. So feel free to go and reach out through the greenopensomerville@gmail email address. So the two questions. One was from Lori Goldman, who is, I know, recognizing they're no longer here, but was just around those collective purchases. So was asking about Green Open and or the Growing Center coordinating those kinds of things.
No, that's a great idea.
Yeah. I mean, we could definitely put the word out and see if people are interested. I think maybe we'll have to think about it a little bit before we just say we're going to do it. But yeah, we'll put that on our to-do list to talk about in the next few days.
And then I know Delphine, who is still here, had asked the question about natives that are particularly suited to serve as living fences here in the Somerville area. So what natives would be particularly suited to serve as living fences here in the Somerville area? And Delphine, just noting, I know I'm voicing your question here, but feel free to come on camera or off mute and ask your question or clarify or elaborate if you'd like.
Bayberry is a champ for tough soils. It's a nitrogen fixer. It doesn't flower, but it has one of the best scents of any plant. The foliage is like a bay leaf, and it can actually be used in cooking. It can be hedged to some degree. And so mixing bayberry with things like clethra, chokeberry, aronia,
Juneberry also.
So serviceberry is a bigger, it's usually more like a tree, but yeah, absolutely. And
I
if you
was
want,
wondering about relative heights, including the height of the bayberry. I was under the impression that they don't get all that tall.
well, a bayberry can be 15 feet tall, but
Oh, great. Okay, maybe it's just.
it won't necessarily get that big in the city, especially if it's in the shade. But it will grow in the shade. Another great plant that is not New England native, but is a very solid shrub native for just a bit further south is Carolina allspice.
Okay.
And it has a wonderful flower with a really interesting scent. Some people think it's like red wine, as a dark red flower. Calycanthus floridus. And another one that I really love to use if I can, especially to mix in with these other things, is inkberry, Ilex glabra. A very native, more sun-loving shrub, but it's evergreen, and it has fruit that birds like. And it will take some shade. And also you could definitely think about viburnums. Now you have to watch out for the viburnum leaf beetle, but viburnum maple leaf viburnum, viburnum acerifolium is a very drought tolerant, very low maintenance shrub that the leaf beetle does not particularly like.
Right.
And it's probably the most native of the viburnums to this part of Massachusetts.
I'm gonna
Thank you
put
so
a
much.
plug in for spice bush for shady areas, because again, if I could wiggle my nose, I want every forsythia hedgerow to become spice bush. I was thinking of pussy willow for a hedge, but that can sucker pretty intensely, so maybe one's neighbors wouldn't appreciate it. But
Yep.
if I were your neighbor, that's something you can hedge, and I would love it. Let's be neighbors.
I was actually just gonna mention that, like, if you want to hedge that, because you have to manage a hedge by cutting it, it could be very beneficial to have something that suckers.
Yeah.
And you keep regenerating it from the ground, especially in when we get our big heavy wet snowstorms and you get damage. It's really nice to have something that wants to grow back from the roots. And a lot of these plants do that in the natural conditions. And this is actually an interesting thing that so plants grown from seed will grow more like the natural, will grow like the natural plant. So a suckering plant will sucker, and almost all of those that I mentioned actually will do that. But these plants that are, if they're grown from cuttings, which is generally what is done in the nursery trade, almost 99% of the time, that's how they're grown. They don't act that way. They won't sucker, they'll stay in place. And so that's part of the reason why they do that, actually. So when you're buying a plant from Mahoney's, it's not going to act like a wild plant, even if you're buying a wild species. So if you buy clethra from Mahoney's, it's probably going to stay in place. That is very desirable to a lot of people. But in certain conditions, for me, it's not desirable. I really want my plants to act more like a wild plant and to intermingle. And the only way to do that, again, is actually to buy plants from Native Plant Trust, because we're the only place that you can buy plants that are actually grown from wild collected seed. So know that when you're buying a plant from Native Plant Trust, that this is not a plant that's going to stay in place. It's a wild plant, and it will generally act more like a wild plant than something that you're buying from the local nursery.
And the wild plant is going to provide a diversity of genetics that you don't get when you plant from clones. And so that's how regular nurseries, for the most part, do it. And so when they do that, they're creating this bottleneck of genetics that can actually be a death knell for a plant or any species if you're just cloning them at a mass scale. So it's really very important to try to get your plants from wild genetics started from seed, or you know, go to places like the Wild Seed Projects and start growing your own little nursery from wild seed. And I throw seeds in my yard all year round. I mean, for the best germination, a winter sowing rather, is usually the most successful, but I do it all year round just because I just like to see what, and you can increase your biodiversity that way. And winterberry, I think winterberry would make a really cool fence, living fence.
Absolutely.
That'd be
Could
cool,
easily
right?
be in that group. Another wetland plant that grows perfectly well in dry conditions.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit less aggressive or a lot less aggressive, but definitely takes to drought. And Delphine mentioned the Rubus odoratus. That's a really great choice that we haven't mentioned at all. But that's a pretty versatile plant that and I love that fruit. Actually, it's pretty. I'm not sure if you want to plant that in urban soil and then eat the fruit, but it's a raspberry that has a large flower, a tasty fruit, and can take a good amount of shade and still give you flowers and fruit.
Mine is way at the back of the yard where there's not much sun, and it's had a ton of flowers.
Nice.
And
And
you see the insects just shaking all around.
Oh, they love it. Yeah, that's a valuable plant.
And Delphine, just confirm that that's the Rubus odorata on your.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we go back real quick to winterberry, Tori and David?
Yeah.
I'm trying to advocate for replacing a picket fence with a living fence, and I know I'll encounter some amount of resistance, so I'm trying to really do my research thoroughly. Of those you mentioned, which ones would you say would continue to provide the most coverage, including in the winter? Inkberry?
Yeah.
And winterberry too?
Well, winterberry will give you winter interest. If you have a female plant, that's a dioecious plant, so you need a male and a female to get the red fruit. But people love it. You know, it's a common plant in the landscape around here. You'll see people have it in their yards for the red fruit in the winter. A lot of those plants that we mentioned are, they can be pretty tall. And so I would recommend pruning them. Keeping it, depending on what your neighbors are concerned with, that's generally what I find is when people have a problem, it's when things get too wild. And
Right.
So
it seems like they would like something that is as similar in space taking as the current picket fence. So something ideally that I imagine, something that can be, that's pretty columnar or
Right.
actually
right.
glued in a column kind of way.
It depends on where the sun is. If the plants are going to be reaching for the sun, then you're going to have a hard time keeping them growing straight upright. but a few of those that we mentioned do tend to be fairly kind of straight limbed. Like clethra is a twisty branch, but it goes straight up a lot of times. And winterberry is similar that way. Will be fairly upright plants. Another one that is gorgeous that has tons of wildlife value is aronia or chokeberry. Again, that's a plant that if it's growing in like where it can get sun from more than one side, which is not always the case in the city, is why I mentioned that. Is like it's usually you're sort of backed up against a building or something like that. Anyway, the branching will be straight vertical. And they're suckering, so they're easy to lop off and keep at a certain height, and they're also easy to cut down to the ground and regenerate. And the inkberry is pretty similar. Like what I would love to see is a combination of those plants. So to have inkberry dispersed.
Going to mention, like having a combination for lots of reasons: A, diversity in general, and B, some succession.
And if you put the inkberry in with the other ones, then you have a evergreen combination. You know, so you would have that more consistent visual break through the seasons. And naturally, these plants often grow in that kind of tangle with each other. They all can take shade. They all prefer sun, but they all kind of grow naturally in the same place. So
that sounds good. Thank you.
Well, should we call it?
yeah.